George Soros has a warning about China, and it's making investment companies furious. But is Soros fighting the wrong battle? Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Surfshark. Whenever you go online, if you want to protect your identity, you should be using a VPN, like Surfshark. So billionaire investor George Soros and I have a lot in common. It's something I never thought I'd say. But as you know, I've been very critical of big Wall Street investment firms, particularly BlackRock, for being so bullish on China. Even as the Chinese Communist Party is tightening its grip on the economy, costing investors $3 trillion, BlackRock is telling people to triple their investments. So I was a bit surprised when I saw this piece in the Wall Street Journal, criticizing BlackRock, written by George Soros himself. He wrote, "Pouring billions of dollars into China now is a tragic mistake. It is likely to lose money for BlackRock's clients and, more important, will damage the national security interests of the U.S. and other democracies." Holy cow, I agree with George Soros. In addition to being a billionaire investor, George Soros is the founder of the Open Society Foundations, which gives millions of dollars to progressive causes around the world. But Soros was also a big investor in China back in the day. For example, in 2009, Soros invested more than $100 million in China. Soros was not the first big investor to pour money into China. But every time someone does, whether it's George Soros or Warren Buffett, it paves the way for even more investment in China. But listen to this. Soros writes, BlackRock has drawn a distinction between state-owned enterprises and privately owned companies, but that is far from reality. The regime regards all Chinese companies as instruments of the one-party state. And this is a problem because the U.S. and China are engaged in a life-and-death conflict between two systems of governance, repressive and democratic. Wait, has George Soros been watching China Uncensored? Now, BlackRock has responded to Soros's piece with the basic, "The United States and China have a large and complex economic relationship, blah, blah, blah." Meanwhile, BlackRock set up a new $1 billion mutual fund in China with the blessings of the Chinese regime. I can't believe I'm saying people should listen to George Soros. But there's a catch. Of course there would be. As I said, Soros is heavily responsible for the wave of foreign investment in China over the years. He doesn't think investing in China is the problem. He thinks the problem is just Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Back in August, Soros wrote this piece for the Wall Street Journal. "Xi's dictatorship threatens the Chinese state." That's where George and I disagree. The reality is, the Chinese Communist Party has been a brutal authoritarian regime since the get-go, way before Xi came to power. Do you realize how many people previous leaders murdered? But Soros doesn't seem to have a problem with that. Soros talks about Deng Xiaoping's consensual rule. Deng Xiaoping was basically the #1 guy in China after Mao died. He was responsible for what's called the reform and opening up. It transformed China from a disastrous economy based on state-run work units to a place where foreign investors could dump loads of money into private companies that were still ultimately controlled by the state. So, was Deng a reformer? Well, yes, but he was also the guy who ordered the Tiananmen Square massacre. His policy was simply, just because we're communists doesn't mean we can't make a little money. It'll help us stay in power. Even though he made economic reforms, the Communist Party still had total control over society, and there were very few personal freedoms. But investors like Soros didn't care about that because they had the freedom to invest in China and maybe get rich. In fact, Soros defends investors like himself who pumped money into China back in the day because things were different back then. Earlier efforts could have been morally justified by claims that they were building bridges to bring the countries closer, but the situation now is totally different. Why is the situation totally different now? Because big mean honey bear Xi Jinping came along and suddenly it's not so easy for you to make money anymore. Again, that's where George and I disagree. The truth is, the Chinese Communist Party has always been a parasite. It sucks up the resources of the West until it became powerful enough to challenge the West. And now, it's planning to decouple from the West. Xi Jinping is just carrying out what the Communist Party planned all along. But there are people who just can't shake the idea that the problem is Xi, not the Communist Party itself. I've talked before about the longer telegram. It basically lays out a US-China strategy where Xi Jinping is the problem. It believes if Xi were ousted, then things would go back to normal. The good old days of investing in a regime that, yeah, was still committing genocide, but hey, you could make money. I did a full episode about that stupid idea. Check it out. Link is below. George Soros says, "I consider Mr. Xi the most dangerous enemy of open societies in the world. The Chinese people as a whole are among his victims, but domestic political opponents and religious and ethnic minorities suffer from his persecution much more." Yes, Xi persecutes ethnic and religious minorities, just like every communist leader before him. But as for political opponents, well, if you've been watching everyone's favorite Chinese communist soap opera, General Hostility, you know Xi's political opponents are a faction tied to former Chinese leader Jiang Zemin. He was a seriously bad dude. He started a campaign of forced organ harvesting, which is killing Chinese people for their organs and selling them for a profit. But Jiang also wooed a lot of Westerners with the goal of increasing foreign investment in China. Next year is an important meeting of the Communist Party, where Xi Jinping faces the risk of being ousted by the Jiang faction. Even if Xi is a bad guy, that doesn't mean his political opponents are the good guys. If George Soros was serious about helping the Chinese people forced to live under the yoke of communism, he'd be saying the US needs to decouple from China. Instead, he says pouring billions of dollars into China now is a tragic mistake. No. Pouring billions of dollars into China at any point was a tragic mistake. It was a mistake when you did it a decade ago. The problem with what BlackRock is doing is not that, as Soros says, that the BlackRock initiative imperils the national security interests of the US and other democracies because the money invested in China will help prop up President Xi's regime. The problem is it helps prop up the Chinese Communist Party. Sometimes smart people can be so stupid. But for those of you who do understand the dangers of the Communist Party, this episode has been sponsored by Surfshark. So when you go online, you should be using a VPN to protect your identity and privacy. Like if you want to start going down the rabbit hole on George Soros. And that's why you should use Surfshark. It's fast and easy. It automatically connects you to the fastest server, or you can choose your own location. Plus, Surfshark provides IP and DNS leak protection so that nobody can find where you're really connecting from. This is important because without Surfshark, governments and your internet service provider can monitor in real time where you're located and what you're doing online. So whenever you go online, especially if you ever use public Wi-Fi, you should be using Surfshark to protect yourself. Plus, you can use one Surfshark account across as many devices as you want. So if you need a VPN, check out Surfshark. Go to surfshark.com/uncensored and use the code uncensored to get our special deal that includes 3 extra months for free. Click the link below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.